Okay. I think we're okay whenever.
All right. So just before we begin, we want to issue a brief trigger warning for our case. It will be about abortion and issues pertinent to women's rights in a non-graphic manner. I encourage any spectators who might have issues with the topic to leave the room, and I'm going to post a link to an anonymous Google form in the chat for judges and competitors. If you have a personal issue with hearing this content, please fill it out, and we'll change sides, no questions asked, and with anonymity maintained. So in a few seconds, I'll post the link in the chat. Okay, it should be in there. So we'll take a brief second, and if we get any opt-outs, then I'll let you know.
If this is gonna be fast, can we get a case doc?
It shouldn't be fast.
Okay, so it seems like somebody has opted out of our case. So we are going to take some time to switch over to the negative side, which will also have a trigger warning that we can give for that as well. And
Wait, sorry, you're switching to the neg?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got an opt out for our app case. So we're gonna go ahead and see if
I don't think that's how it works.
I mean, y'all just need to have another case if someone's out. Y'all can't just say that they need to give up their side.
second app that we can use as a backup. I thought because we had choice of the sides in the flip anyway, with the second point that it would be fine, but we can just go to the second app, that's okay. So let us just take a moment to get our flows ready for that and pull that up, and then we'll be good to go.
Did we ever end up making a email chain?
I can set it up if y'all are trying to pull up your other app.
All right.
I see one judge email in the chat. Did the
They
other?
said they don't.
They don't.
Oh, sorry. I'll actually add mine to the chat really quick. That's my bad.
Okay, I sent it.
So this case also has a trigger warning.
No,
Or
no,
no,
we're doing
sorry,
the
sorry,
case,
never
so it
mind.
doesn't-
Yeah,
yeah.
sorry. Okay, that's my bad. So if everyone's ready, then I guess I can begin. And if I cut out,
Actually, I'm sorry, just really quickly, is there a judge keeping official time? Just so we can have a neutral timekeeper?
I would just say if that's something you're interested in, you can be the official timekeeper.
I'm not interested in it enough to do the work, so I guess not.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter to me.
okay, so is everyone good to go? All right, so if you can't hear me for whatever reason, feel free to ask me after I finish my speech and I'll be happy to clarify anything for you. With that being said, let's begin. Sydney and I are firm resolved. The benefits of the International Monetary Fund outweigh the harms. Contention 1 is cyber innovation. The world is shifting towards digital currency, and Reader 20 explains that a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, is necessary to facilitate this shift because it enables global monitoring of blockchain currency. Luckily, Hoi 20 finds that the IMF will soon be able to facilitate a global CBDC transaction, and Smith 20 finds that the IMF is the best equipped to handle international oversight of a CBDC because it provides unique protection and legitimacy. The CBDC is helpful in 2 ways. First, ensuring safety. Traditionally, crypto has been vulnerable to attack, with Rife 19 outlining that millions have been lost from hacks on cryptocurrencies like CoinCheck. Luckily, Goldsmith 20 explains that the centralization of a CBDC would allow the government to destroy the facade of pseudo-anonymity and eliminate criminal activity. The impact is reducing terrorism. Popper 19 finds that terrorist cells are currently using cryptocurrencies to raise finances because there isn't enough police regulation to detect them. This is harmful because Popper furthers that terrorist attacks require little funding, and the money yielded by crypto ventures is enough to finance them. That's devastating, as the United Nations 20 explains that a surge in terrorist attacks would affect millions through the displacement of food insecurity associated with conflict. Second, decreasing volatility. Handagama 21 explains that a CBDC would replace cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, which have high price volatility due to the lack of intrinsic value. That's important because Bar 21 finds that Bitcoin cannot function as a medium of exchange in daily life because of its volatility. Luckily, Chiobano 21 finds that CBDCs reduce volatility and provide trust by means of associating themselves with a tangible tradable asset, readying themselves for common use. The impact is poverty. Vina 15 reports that cryptocurrency could bring 5 billion people without bank access into the economy, and Brian 19 quantifies that the blockchain technology in a CBDC will lift billions out of poverty by providing market access in an informal sector. Contention 2 is China. The IMF is protecting the global economy from China in 2 ways. First, deterring the CPEC. The CPEC, or the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is a component of China's infrastructure initiative. The CPEC is immensely harmful because Markey 17 finds that it will lead to a breakout of violent conflict between India and Pakistan because a China-backed Pakistan would be emboldened to attack, and India would feel a need to defend its territory. Pulla 19 finds that any attack could set off a chain effect leading to a regional nuclear war due to high tensions, which Rice 19 finds would kill 125 million people through initial impact and climate destabilization. Luckily, the IMF is beginning to solve this. Hyder 21 finds that IMF loans have cut funding for the CPEC through budget redistribution, causing Pakistan to reduce execution of the projects. Hamid 19 furthers that IMF loans are causing the abandonment of CPEC projects through fiscal consolidation and the elimination of surplus energy directed towards the CPEC, and Chaudhry 18 finds that Pakistan is delaying existing projects over funding worries. Second, avoiding debt crises. China is currently causing a worldwide debt disaster, as Gerstle 18 finds that recipient countries of Chinese loans all face rising debt to GDP ratios beyond 50%, with extreme debt owed to China due to extreme interest rates. The IMF prevents this disaster in 2 ways. First, trade-off. Gerstle finds that absent the IMF, countries facing financial distress would likely turn to China. However, Chinese loans are worse than IMF loans, as Asia 20 quantifies that Chinese interest rates are almost 6 times higher than the IMF's. Furthermore, Abbas 19 reports that Chinese loans require recipient states to pay them back much more quickly. Moreover, Renjin 20 finds that Chinese loans are cloaked in secrecy, which Tan 19 finds makes it harder to lend aid effectively, trapping countries in debt cycles. For these reasons, Abbas concludes that IMF loans are better for stabilizing countries in the long run. Second, defaults. Abbas 19 explains that if recipient countries are overburdened with debt from China, they will inevitably turn to the IMF. That's critical, as Belima 19 finds that IMF-supported programs significantly reduce the likelihood of debt crises such as sovereign defaults. The impact is poverty. Ribalock 17 finds that debt crises decrease the income of the poor by 24%, which Jones 16 finds pushes 125 million people into extreme poverty. Thus, we affirm.
Can I get the evidence on CPEC that they're causing delays over funding right now? And then also the evidence under trade-off on your second link on China about how China is worse, like the interest rates are worse.
And then on C1, can I get Smith 20? Thanks.
Sorry, what was the CPEC evidence that you wanted again?
2 pieces. One, actually, yeah, the one that's causing delays over right now, over funding, and then the second one was that Chinese loans are worse, like the interest rates.
Okay, so just to clarify, I have them all pasted and I can send it now. The Asia 20 card about interest rates being higher, the Goldsmith 20 about IMF being needed for cryptocurrency, and the Hyder 21 about CPEC, like decreasing the execution of CPEC projects, right?
No,
Okay.
there's one more. Wait, no, there's one more. It was the one about Chinese interest rates being worse. It's under trade-off on your link too.
That's Asia 20, Chinese interest rates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
No worries. They should all be sent to everybody in the chain now.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Yeah, no worries.
All right.
can you use your mic so I can-
Yeah. Okay, can everybody hear me? My mic gets a little bit iffy sometimes. Okay, sounds good. All right, anybody not ready? Our sole contention is rejecting the patriarchy. Action 18 writes that the IMF has failed to acknowledge that the advice it gives to countries reflects and reinforces patriarchal power structures and entrenching rather than transforming gender inequality. This happens in 5 ways.
First is mentioned. DETRA 15 writes that IMF programs are likely to reduce the ability and willingness of governments to protect women's economic rights. If governments are under scrutiny to comply with the IMF regulations to continue receiving aid, they become unwilling to strongly intervene in society and in the economy to protect women. Reductions of government spending that accompany the adoption of IMF structural adjustment policies undermine government's capacity to enforce women's economic rights. Thus, the predicted probability of women's major economic rights violations increases by 57% in the recipient countries of IMF loans. Second is policy focus. Economists focus overwhelmingly on the productive economy. In other words, they focus on those aspects of the economy that would make profits and cover costs. Economists thus ignore the reproductive economy, which meets the needs of and sustains human life. This sector of the economy is where the majority of women work. By viewing the economy this way, women's labor is invisible and therefore obscures the economic and social costs of structural adjustment on women's work and lives. Thus, women do 70% of the world's work but receive only 10% of the revenues and own only 1% of the wealth. This is seen in how IMF programs are evaluated. In India, after SAPs were instituted, the Indian economy had a 1.5% growth rate. However, there was a recession in the agricultural and industrial industries. Third is agriculture. Another SAP requirement is for a country to increase its exports. In a developing country, this usually means that agricultural exports must increase, consequently increasing cash crops. However, Campbell 10 finds that cash crops decrease the amount of food and income for women. In Ghana, for example, due to an increase in the number of cash crops and an increase in the amount of land used to grow cash crops, Ghanaian women are left with smaller holdings and poorer soil without the ability to practice crop rotation. Food production declines and malnutrition deepens. Empirically, Campbell continues that if there is less food, the men receive the same amount of food while receive even less. Thus, due to chronic malnutrition in children, up to 50% of girls are malnourished. The issue is cyclical as malnourished girls become malnourished adolescents who then marry early, have children early, and have low birth weight babies who then become malnourished children at adolescence. Fourth is economic opportunity. DETRA 15 finds that privatization is an important element of structural reform programs. However, because the state sector has often employed women in greater numbers than other sectors of the economy, when privatization women's employment, economic discrimination. This male breadwinner bias refers to the fact that women are often passed over or encouraged to give up jobs to make way for men seeking employment. This is empirically proven. Egypt's 1956 constitution included protections for several aspects of women's political rights. Pre-IMF participation in state sector employment in the 1960s, 1970s, 50% of women's formal employment. This trend reversed sharply when privatization and reductions in state spending led to fewer state sector jobs. Similarly, privatization from the IMF in Africa and Latin America in the 90s has hurt women's employment prospects. After Zimbabwe instituted IMF-supported SAPs in the 90s, the number of women working full-time dropped by 30,000%. Fifth is funding cuts. As part of SAPs, the IMF mandates spending cuts. Campbell 10 concludes that countries begin with social programs. The ramifications are felt by women. In Tanzania, 71 mothers died in the first 13 weeks of 1988 when economic reforms were enforced 4 times by the maternal death rate of previous years due to cuts to healthcare. Route 15 continues, this also hurts other individuals that are minorities that face discriminatory funding cuts. Underview. The judge must prioritize rejecting any instance of female oppression before evaluating utilitarian impacts. 2 warrants. 1, you have an obligation to and affirm femininity. Ewing 97 explains that supporting women's right is not a part-time commitment. U.S. also act towards a feminist worldview in every other setting. Again, anything we do without acting grounded in ourselves in the mindset will be hopelessly contaminated. Second, judges should prioritize violence against marginalized groups because structural violence is underrepresented in conventional thinking. Nixon 11 finds this is called slow violence and occurs out of sight. Thus, it's not typically viewed as violence. These sufferings are underrepresented and will be never solved.
I don't know about anyone else, but you were breaking up in your speech for me. I think I got most of it, but can you repeat your first warrant on the underview?
Yeah, I think her mic
My
sometimes
mic gets iffy sometimes. I can just send a speech doc or I can repeat it, whichever one works.
I would prefer you just summarize.
All right, which one did you need?
The first one on the underview.
The first warrant on the underview.
So it's just, we read, you have an obligation to betray an instance of hegemonic masculinity because our evidence finds that women's rights is not a part-time commitment, and anything that we try to do without a feminist worldview at all times will be contaminated, and all policy that is made will be biased.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did anybody need anything else, or would you like
I'm
a
sending
speech doc? Okay.
Can you, yeah, can you give us a little bit of like off prep time to read your fourth warrant, just because you cut
Yeah.
off and it
Yeah,
just,
I'm sorry, my
Maybe,
computer's not great.
The underview's at the top.
okay. Yeah, it's just the privatization that we both missed, that we have
Fine,
to.
take your time.
Yeah, just let us know when you're good.
Okay. I think we've read it. So have you read it, Neil?
not yet.
Oh, never mind. Give Neil a moment then. Okay, he says that he's ready. So we'll switch audio and then everybody can go to cross if nobody wants.
You can send this after cross. Maybe I just gave the wrong tag, but for the C1, I wanted the whatever the maybe it was Hoy, not Smith, but the card that says that the IMF has the capacity to regulate Bitcoin. You can just get it to me after
You can
cross
get
though.
it.
So
Yeah, that's not what our case says, but we can give you the stuff that says that the IMF has the centralization that the IMF does enables a government to regulate.
whatever
Anything
you
that
have
the
is-
IMF can do it.
So we'll do that.
I'm good for cross, and sorry, I'm just gonna switch and speak out of Sandra's mic for the rest of the round. My mic's just not gonna work. I hope that's okay.
Okay, that works. Okay. Sorry, let me pull up a timer real quick. Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. When do you establish in your second link that there are no economic benefits to the reproductive economy?
Our argument is
they
not
ignore
that
the
there,
economic-
our argument is not that there is no economic gains in the reproductive economy. It's that there's always a focus on the productive economy, which disproportionately harms the reproductive economy. Empirically, in the past, we saw cuts to the agriculture sector, which is what employs most women. Can I get a question?
Just one follow-up on that. If your first warrant in that subpoint is that economists focus on profits, and you never show that the reproductive economy doesn't show profits, then how do you link into like all of this policy stuff afterwards that like economists will never
Yeah,
look
the
at?
reproductive economy is the part of the economy that sustains the need for human life, which means there's always an interest in solving for it. It's just they always like empirically the IMF has always focused on the productive economy over the reproductive economy. That's why our empirics indicate that in the past there's been extreme cuts because of SAPs to, for example, when the Indian economy grew after SAPs, the overall GNP of the country went up. So yeah, there was economic growth. However, there was just extreme cuts in the agricultural and industrial sectors, which is why even though overall economic growth increased, women disproportionately were affected in negative ways, which is why, prioritizing the productive economy and overall economic growth is not a good policy making mindset. You need to have an economic framework that prioritizes women from the start. Can I get a question?
Question. Yeah.
All right. So on your argument specifically about China, you say that China that right now there's been delays in loans and stuff, and CPEC is not progressing anymore. If we have evidence that shows that in the past 2 weeks that CPEC projects have resumed, the governor of the country has come out and said that CPEC is, great, they're partnering with China, whatever. Does that, when's your evidence from about causing delays?
It's from 2021.
Yeah, when?
I don't think so.
You don't think so, what?
Because the evidence is from roughly the same time. So I don't think you
No,
can.
but my evidence is from last week.
This is
Where's
from
yours
January.
from?
Okay, well, we have evidence from 2018, 2019, and 2021.
Like, that doesn't really matter, right? That's 2 years ago. I'd say right now, if there's evidence that Pakistan and China are collaborating and CPEC projects are happening right now, that just,
We have evidence of a 3-year trend of decreasing CPEC involvement, and we give you
Sure.
multiple.
But my evidence postdates your 3-year trend and says that right now they're expediting CPEC projects. But
I
you
would
can
say that it doesn't matter because any trend has some aspect of volatility.
That's-
If
you
we
can
have a much longer time frame, that the overall trend
I
is that
contest that's not true. If the evidence indicates that right now the trend has been stopped and they're continuing projects, then it
Yeah,
doesn't.
right now, exactly what I'm saying. Right now, we're saying that it might be increasing, but we're saying that over a much longer time frame,
That doesn't make any sense. If the reason why it was postponed is now gone, then there's no trend anymore for that time.
We're gonna take prep, run it like now.
Okay. All right, with like the time it takes to transfer over and everything, I had 2 minutes and 10 seconds. If anybody, yeah, thank you. Okay, so roadmap before we get started, it's going to be the shell, content warning, and then going down to like some general responses, but I can't make responses because it's all women's rights stuff. So it's basically just going to be the shell.
Hold on, give us a second. We need paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can everybody let me know when they're ready? Are both debaters from DV ready?
No.
Okay, no.
Is it just one off?
It's one off, and then I can give some general responses, but I'm not
I
gonna
don't know how many paper I need. Yeah, you go ahead.
further compromise the safety of people around by going into like. Okay, are we good? No? Yes? Okay, let's begin. A is the interpretation. If the content of their case includes potentially triggering topics such as women's subjugation, debaters must give a verbal trigger warning before reading the case that gives the other team or judges the option to opt out and should have an alternate case with content prepared to read instead. B is the violation. We met, they didn't. They didn't read a content warning despite literally knowing that a minimum of one person in the round feels unsafe dealing with these topics. We ran a content warning and somebody explicitly said that they cannot deal with the safety in this round talking about women's rights and women's subjugation, and they still chose to run it anyway. They literally chose to make an individual unsafe in the round for round game. They've run this case earlier in the tournament and also didn't do a content warning. They're at the point where they're placing personal gain at a tournament over the mental well-being of an individual. C is the standard. The standard is safety. Wake Forest writes that for those who have experienced trauma, content warnings help them avoid flight or fight modes that occur when they are exposed to words or imagery that remind them of the trauma. Content warnings can also help students who are recovering from mental illnesses, suicidal tendencies, and eating disorders, and other issues like that, which we're not going to go into in like detail because I don't want to trigger anybody else. But D is the voters. Safety is the voting issue. The education or fairness of the debate does not matter if people are being actively harmed, and safety is a prereq to both because A, there can be no fair or productive education in an unsafe learning environment, and B, lack of content warnings pushes students with trauma out of the event entirely, which excludes these people from the fairness and education of the participation in the debate. If you allow them to go on because they've run this case before with a content warning, they're probably going to do it again, which will continue to subject people to unsafe situations. The second voter is fairness. I have so many responses that contradict their case, but I literally can't read any of them because somebody in round has expressed that they make them uncomfortable and they can't deal with the safety of hearing things about like contraceptives and about women's rights. So there's no way that I can actually read responses against their case in any way, shape, or form because it's all pertinent to women's rights, which somebody in round has says compromise their safety. So drop the debater A to punish them for a violation that has already occurred, that has already skewed the safety and therefore fairness of this round, and B to set a better norm for the activity as a whole. This round is being streamed on live on YouTube right now, and people are watching it, setting a standard that like the fairness of an activity and importantly the safety of teenagers matters more than like a random flow is the most important thing you can do as a judge, as an adult in the community with an obligation to protect children. But again, they will if people see that lacking content warnings loses rounds, they will be more likely to have content warnings, which ensures the safety throughout the activity. Default to competing interpretations, like responsibility collapses and leads to judge interventions in everything. There's the only way to vote is on us. There's no RVIs because one, they could bait with RVIs, they could justify infinite abuse to bait out theory and then practice winning the shell. Maybe they're really good at content warning shells, but that doesn't mean they can do this because they're still going to subject people to unsafe situations. And B, logic, because it doesn't make logical sense to reward them for not hurting safety. You don't arrest the victim if the accused turns out innocent. Logic is a prereq to all theory arguments because it indefinitely determines whether or not an argument is valid. Prefer this over substance because the substance debate is so skewed. I'm not even going to go to it because literally we couldn't do any of their internal links because all of their internal links are women's rights. And somebody in round, a judge or a competitor has said that they cannot listen to that to have safety. And I'm not going to sit here and put somebody in a worse position mentally and safety in the round. So I'm not going to go to top level responses. Another clarification, I encourage anybody who wants to leave the round now that they can. Obviously, if you want to stay in, you can, but I'm not going to make you listen to the rest of a theory round on like content that you can't hear. So yeah, that's the place. There's no substance. Substance can't be in this round. It's about checking abuse and prioritizing safety over like random like tit for tat debate education.
Can we get the shell script?
Yeah. I'll put it in the email chain.
Cool.
Okay, you have to read comment.
We'll be unmuted until we get that, and then we'll start time. That's which part of our shell is true. Mhm.
It's sent to everybody.
Alright, we'll tell you.
I'll hold my phone to screen when we start prep. Okay. So that was 1:30. The order will be a counter interp, then I'll go to their interp, and then if like time allows, I'll do substance. Can I get thumbs up from when you're good? Okay. Okay. A is the interpretation. Debaters must give a content warning before reading anything that can be potentially mentally or physically triggering because of descriptions of graphic violence. We mean nothing in our cases triggering. We literally only use the words economic harms, poverty, or death, which is the case that they use in their case as well when they talk about econ decline and nuke war and all the things that they talk about. The standard is safety. If people aren't feeling safe in the round, then they aren't able to engage in the activities. It's an internal link for participation. The second standard is education. What their interpretation does is it creates a race to the bottom where people can constantly call any single argument as triggering, and then we never debate anything because obviously these issues are all really, really bad. Our interpret a lot better because it actually uses mental health scientists from the Kim 11 finds that these kinds of language that potentially trigger past physical or mental harms are the ones that could actually have these potential psychological impacts. Simply talking about various issues is not the same thing. Don't let them say it's because that creates a race to the bottom where we exclude discourse on actually good issues. Me and Sujita came to this round wanting to talk about women's rights because things like economic subjugation of Indian women is something that my ancestors and her ancestors have felt, and it continues to impact my parents and our families. Well said today. They preclude our ability to have this kind of meaningful discussion. It's a lot worse for education. The voter is fairness. If we're not able to have these kinds of arguments around, it's really, really bad. RBI is good.
No, keep reading, just move.
Okay, well, I'll go to their case and I'll read it. All right, on their counter and interp, their argument is that we are violating it. There's literally, their content warning is about graphic descriptions for abortion. Ours has nothing graphic in our entire case. We're literally just saying that there's economic violations, there's an econ decline. If what they're talking about is true, they shouldn't have read their own case because they also use these same words of econ decline. The only thing is we also talk about specifically for women. It's literally no different. But second, crossed by what I said earlier, they're literally reading a theory shell because they don't want to debate us on the fem issue. They're wasting this round where we could be having a good, productive discussion on how the IMF is terrible for women and Western institutions consistently oppress people like me and Sujita and our family. Also, we do know how to read trigger warning. We read it in our round 7 against Bethesda, which is like 60 people were on the call, and we literally read a trigger warning because in that round we were talking about sensitive subjects like violence. We weren't mentioning any of that here. Like, we don't have an intent to the bad character they paint us out to be just like isn't true. On fairness, they say it's uncomfortable and they can't actually debate us on this because their responses don't apply. It's not my fault if the IMF is not good for women's economic rights. That's their burden of proof to prove. It's not my fault if they can't do that. On the RBI is bad. They say that it creates an incentive for theory. That's literally them. They're reading theories that they don't solve back. There's nothing, we're not the ones who introduced the theory debate. That makes no sense. Then they say it's not logical. If in today's debate, the only flow on the left is the theory shell, then it's unfair for us to not have an RBI because then we can't win on it. There's literally no way we can win the round. The RBIs are really, really good. But RBIs are also good for 4 reasons. One, they can go for substance or theory while we have to win both. So we're skewed on the ground flow. Also, second, an RBI allows theory to function like every other argument. If they run a case and it makes turns off of it, then we would win. There's no reason that should be any different. But third, it deters free of theory, which is really, really critical.
Yes.
All right, I'll go to their case. At the top on cryptocurrency, their econ link is a independent link into our case on feminism. The idea that cryptocurrency solves emerging market issues is a reductionist approach. It is an extension of neo-colonial attitudes. The Atlantic 16 finds that the bright-eyed American idealist feels capable of solving intricate problems with one-dimensional solutions. The idea that blockchain could be a transformative tool for social change underscores the same problem that the IMF has. We talk about in our second warrant. This is an independent link into our framing and a reason to reject the act. Do you have to drop that argument off the debate stuff?
Oh, yeah, just say drop the argument of the debater. You should be able to win.
Drop the argument off the debater. You should be able to win on turns even if you lose your own case because it doesn't have these issues. That's better for debate because it allows debaters to still want to engage in the activity and participate even if they make a mistake in the beginning of the round. And second, it allows for education rather than just pushing people who make a mistake out of the round. That means that even if you drop our case because of the fact that because of like the trigger warning shell, we'd still win off of the neo-colonialist term, which is an independent link into our framing.
Okay, are you ready for Crossfire?
Yeah.
Okay. So what you're saying is that like our trigger warning is different than yours because it's like graphic, right? That's your point.
Yeah, our point is just that we didn't read, like, the only things we talked about were things like poverty or malnutrition, which your case also mentions in every PF
Okay,
debater.
my point is that you say like, oh, it's not graphic, it's about women's rights, but not graphic. So how do you get out of the fact that our trigger warning, which we literally read to everybody in round, says non-graphic descriptions of women's rights, right? And somebody still opted out, somebody still said that that made them unsafe, and you still chose to read an argument that was going to compromise the mental status of somebody in this round.
Okay, can I answer? So
Yeah.
you said non-graphic descriptions of issues like abortion. I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about this if there are people who opted out are still in the room, so like I'll wait a second for anyone who wants.
No, you don't have to say it. We said like our literal content
Yours
warning
is very different because when
but it's not. Yeah.
When you mention things like abortion, the issue is that that has connotations with things like assault or physical harm that an economic violation just doesn't have. This is things like unemployment. We discuss these issues in debate all the time. When you read a theory shell and detract from me and Sanjita to be able to talk about the past oppression of like our own people, that's way worse for debate. Can I get a question?
Okay, I wanna bring that back. So our explicit quote was, which I can send to everybody who wants it. Our case will be talking about abortions and issues pertinent to women's rights in a non-graphic manner. Somebody opted out. The issues pertinent to women's rights in a non-graphic manner was not something that they could do.
Wait.
So I don't understand why you don't get a content warning. Like, why genuinely don't you read one? If it is in any way going to be an issue, why wouldn't you give the, especially after you knew that somebody in the round had an issue with women's rights in the first place? Okay, yeah, you can go.
Okay, thank you. So what I was trying to say is that our case doesn't even argue, it's not even about like women's rights. It's just the idea that the IMF doesn't prioritize women. So the policies it takes ignores the economic repercussions it has on them. It's literally not about like
women's rights, and you opened your case with "we must dismantle the patriarchy," and go through a whole about like
patriarchy is just something. Sydney, you talked for like 2 minutes wielding accusations against me and Sanjita's character, so I think I have a right to speak for 30 seconds without you cutting me off.
Yeah, you can talk.
Right. So like I was saying, our argument is just that the IMF fundamentally ignores the impact that its policies have on women, and that reinforces the already biased structures that our world has. That is not saying or giving any sort of descriptions about women having like terrible conditions or like anything. We're literally just using common impacts that all PF debaters use, and I'm sure you have used and you just did use in your affirmative. We're only implicating specifically to women. When you read these arguments, you create a terrible debate space where people like me and Sanjita can never talk about our issues. That's cross.
Yeah, I guess we'll talk about it more. We're gonna take the rest of our prep and then come back. And again, that invitation is always open to anybody in the round or any judge that wants to submit their ballot and leave. I understand that at this point, like discourse on trauma gets really hard. So that's open.
I have that as like well above your prep.
Because we hold it up when we started. So I'm going to go back to 50 seconds and we'll take our final 10 seconds.
Wait, you haven't started?
I think you had like 20 seconds left, but take whatever you want. It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so my extensions of the actual shell are going to be extremely fast, but they're all already in the email chain. So if anyone misses anything there, they can look in the email chain. All of my actual responses will be at like a normal speed. So I hope that's okay with everyone.
Can I pull up my off paper? Hold on. Which shell are you starting on?
Yours than ours. All right. So, well, I guess I'll wait until Doherty Valley is ready.
We're good. We're good.
Okay. Again, if I cut out, just feel free after the speech. Okay. Start off on the top level, they conceded that theory comes first in the round. 2 warrants. 1, prefer this over substance because the substance debate is so skewed. That's the fairness voter. But 2, theory comes first because there's a debate about the rules of the game. You can't actually have the game if you don't know about the rules of the game in the first place. They conceded both of these links. At that point, content doesn't matter. But then on their counter-interp, first on their interp, they said that the content must be graphic, but our content warning literally says that we include non-graphic matters, and someone still opted out. They knew someone couldn't handle the non-graphic content and still chose to run their case. Also, I would say that describing the ways the patriarchy subjugates women into extreme poverty is graphic because many people have been subjected to it in their own daily lives. But then they also say that it's not actually about women's rights, but literally start by talking about the patriarchy. That's obviously a non-response. You can drop that off the floor. But second, or third, they try to say that it's because we don't want to engage in the issue. We came here wanting to talk about women's rights in the first place, but someone opted out in the round. That means that like we have like better solvency in the first place because we're actually respecting the pre-file harms to actual people in the real world. This obviously isn't true. We just value safety more. Then they don't have the authority to decide what is and is not triggering. That's the thesis of their second part of their standard. More on their discourse footer. We literally never say that they can't run their arguments. We think that they are really important and try to run them ourselves. All we ask is that they run a content warning before to avoid any pre-fiat harms. Their advocacy doesn't matter if they cause actual harm in the real world because that always outweighs as they conceded in their rebuttal. But then their interp doesn't matter at all at the point where someone has already opted out of a case that includes the exact same topics that they run. They say that our content warning is about graphic violence, but this is blatantly false. Let's look back at the specific wording of the content warning that we read at the beginning of the round. Quote, our case will be talking about issues pertinent to women's rights in a non-graphic manner, end quote. They know that at least one person opted out of that case, but they still chose to run it anyway. They said that we are only running a theory shell to win the round. That's not true. We obviously care about the topic because we run content warnings on every single case that could be potentially triggering, and we were running women's rights in the first place with a content warning. We're literally running the same arguments as them, but we're doing it in a more correct way. Then on to our extensions. Asian protection, the content of the case includes trigger types, just one subjugation. Debaters must give a verbal content warning before reading the case that gives the other team or judge the opt out. Alternative case without content read just said. Because the violation, they didn't read a content warning despite literally knowing that a minimum 1 person opted out. They've run this case in multiple rounds of the tournament and conceded that they only read a content warning once. That proves their point that harm is long-standing and repetitive. You drop them there. C is the standard. The standard is safety. Wake Forest rights for those who've experienced trauma. Content warnings help them avoid fight or flight modes that push them out of the activity. D is the voters. Safety is a voting issue. The education or fairness of the debate does not matter if people are being actively harmed. The safety is a prerequisite to vote because A, there can be no fair protective education, non-safe learning environment, and B, lack of content warnings push students out of trauma out of the debate entirely, which excludes people from the fairness of education participation debate. They've conceded both of these warrants and the fact that it comes first. But then on fairness, we have so many responses that contradict their case, but they're about women's rights. We can't read them because someone opted out of the topic in the first place. That's use safety and therefore fairness of the round. And B, it's a better norm because there are so many people watching right now. I know this round is being live streamed on YouTube and there's so many spectators. That sets a norm. Default to competing interpretations, reasonability collapses judge intervention, interpretation guarantee a fair debate. No RVIs. They try to say that RVIs are good, but drop our logic warrants and you don't blame the victim for the criminal, not being guilty. At that point, they drop the RVIs don't matter in the round anymore. But then you can also vote for us again because that you have to drop the debaters to set a norm for the activity because if you don't drop them, people learn that they cannot run content warnings on potentially triggering subjects and get away with it. But by dropping them, you establish a norm. This is TOC. So many people are watching. It's high stakes. That's how you actually make the activity better in the first place.
We used a minute 30, so we're gonna run fast. We have 30 seconds left.
The order is going to be a little bit weird. Yeah, so I'm going to be going on the drop the argument, then I'm going to be going to the turn on their case, then I'm going to go to their interp and our interp. I'll signpost as I go.
Wait, sorry, what was the first thing you said?
I'm going to talk about the drop the argument.
Thank you.
I think they say theory first, but
They say theory comes first, sure, that's fine, but the critical mistake they make in their rebuttal is by not responding to the drop the argument, not the debater. Insofar as they drop that, there is no reason to drop us in this round. It is game over. The only substance left in the round is the turn on their case. We tell you that saying that crypto is the way to solve for all economic harms is a reductionist neoliberal policy, which underscores the same things that we talk about in our framing. Insofar as the framing gets conceded and the drop the argument is conceded, you can vote right now. There is literally no way for them to win. This still sets a precedent because we know that this discourse happened in this round and it will still lead to all the impacts they talk about. At that point, there's just no way to vote for them. But then on their case, they don't respond to the fact that there's no reason to read a trigger warning on things like economic arguments. Insofar as that's true, it creates a race to the bottom because then every single argument needs a trigger warning. For example, things like poverty and Indo-Pak war, which affects Indian people like me and Sanji, need trigger warnings because this is nothing graphically affecting women. We literally read trigger warnings in other rounds. In our round where we read colonialism against Bethesda, round 7, we read a trigger warning because it talks about graphic violence like genocide. There's no way that you can say reading a trigger warning for things like economic arguments is a good model for debate because then you have to read a trigger warning of every single argument which shuts out education because you never have discourse on important topics. This is an identity issue. Me and Sanji care deeply about arguments about the IMF and how they affect women specifically in India because it affects our ancestors, our parents, and it's a deeply connected issue to us that we want discourse on. That's why we came into this round and this tournament wanting to read this argument. They dropped the race to the bottom argument. Education is a prerequisite to fairness because education shapes the way that we view fairness. For example, Brown v. Board gave people a way to view the world and how fairness should be established. Education should always come first. Insofar as that's true, we're just winning the education argument. Discourse on these topics is really important. It's an inherently patriarchal thing to say that talking about economic effects on women is like really, really bad. We say that's a really bad form of education because then every single argument they read in their case should also have a trigger warning. If someone in the room is triggered by arguments like poverty, you should read a trigger warning on that. If someone is triggered by an argument about war, you should read a trigger warning on that. It just simply does not make sense. It's a bad model for debate that shuts out discourse. But then on RBIs, they say we don't respond to the fact that we don't respond to their logic war. No, Sanji responds to it. She says that it's not fair if they have 2 blows to go for it. We only have 1. Insofar as theory was the only flow left in the round, but I guess we're going for that substance argument. It's not fair if there's only theory left in the round and they're the only ones that are able to win. RBIs are the only way that you can win because an RBI is like reading a counter interp is inherently a turn on their interp, and in regular debate, if you read a turn on an argument, you should be able to win. Otherwise, there's physically no way for me and Sanji to win this round. Insofar as that's true, yes, RBIs. Sure, you can go for competing interps, that's fine. On our case, they make a lot of really bad comments about our character, which is honestly just really, really like offensive because this is a live stream for a national tournament and they're questioning mine and Sanji's character in a speech. We obviously know that trigger warnings are a good thing. We've read them in previous rounds. We just think it's a bad model of debate to say we have to read trigger warnings on things like economic arguments for women. That's just inherently a non-feminist thing to say that every time you like links into our framing about how economic impacts to women are always shut out and not that there's no discourse on them. You can still also read regular econ impacts against our argument and still engage in a regular econ round like you would in any other round.
Okay, we're ready for Grand Cross, but if I understand this is like emotional, if the other team wants to take a minute before Grand Cross,
it's emotional because you're questioning our character when we came in to read issues that have
okay, we'll not take a minute before Grand Cross.
Okay. So yeah, I am emotional, but it's because of your actions.
Okay, thank you. We can go to Grand Cross then.
You can have a question.
All right, so let's talk about where you say that you ran a content warning against Bethesda, right?
Yeah, because our
you
case.
run your neg case at 8 rounds so far in the tournament.
No, we didn't read
Yes,
this.
we didn't read this.
Like,
We've been
reading
reading 4
the-
different arguments.
We have 4 different nags. This is one.
Right, but you've
Right.
never given a content warning on specific like women's subjugation, like women's rights issues.
I don't think you
Okay,
should be
hold
doing
on a second,
trigger
hold on
warnings
a
for
second.
economic
Literally,
arguments.
this is
But why is, but I just don't understand. I don't understand the issue.
Yeah,
why
I get
one
it.
is
You can
trigger
start
warning,
like
even if you don't
you can
think
start
it's
tainting our character again,
I'm
but I just want
not
to
attacking your
this is
character. I'm not
so
attacking
ironic
your
to me
character.
because
Sorry, can I
this is
please
literally
finish?
the
I'm
thesis-
not attacking your character.
This is literally the thesis of our case, where somehow it's okay to talk about regular econ issues, which your case talks about too, but it's not okay to talk about it when it's in the context of women. Name one thing in our case that's triggering. All we say is that women experience high levels of malnutrition or high levels of unemployment, things that my grandmother experienced when SAPs were put in India. This is an identity argument, so when you take away our ability to read that, that's way worse for us in the context of this debate and way worse for people of women of color everywhere.
Okay, so first of all, right, when we're talking about it, there is a difference when it's econ impacts that go out to the patriarchy, which implies women's rights. You start with, you have a moral obligation to adhere to.
Sydney, hold on, Sydney.
Please
Is it
let me
better?
finish. Oh my God, seriously, we have to have a conversation. Dude, oh my God, like, can I please talk? Thank you. Okay. When you start your case with like subjugation of women under the patriarchy, you have to adhere to a feminist ideology, which is what you say. You're talking about, oh my God, seriously, you've been talking for like 2 minutes. You have to talk about like, you're talking about feminist issues, right? So then we get into a point where we know we're talking about women's subjugation issues, which we explicitly say in our content warning, women's rights issues, and somebody has said that makes them unsafe in the round. I understand it's an identity argument.
No, hold on. Sydney, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you define women's subjugation for me?
Yeah, when you're specifically talking about the patriarchy and adopting a feminist worldview.
So that's not the definition. The definition of
No,
subjugation
I'm
is
saying
not.
that you're talking about women's rights.
You
You're
talk
talking
from
about
you talk from 1 to 2.
when you're talking about, and it doesn't even matter. You never.
The definition,
shut us
hold on.
out of
The
debates,
definition
like-
of subjugation is the action of bringing someone or something under a domination or control. Our argument is simply that when the economy grows under IMF programs, it ignores that women lose employment opportunities.
That is
not
not
a form of
subjugation.
subjugation. It's literally just an argument about the economy.
And if
it's
anything-
not my fault that you like chose to
Here's
not
the
respond
thing.
to
Here's the
education
thing.
about the debate.
Even if it's not triggering to you, running a content warning would have literally done.
You're
nothing.
telling me that you should have read a content warning on your poverty argument and your new poor argument. I'm from India. You don't think the 3 past Indo-Pak wars that members of my family have fought in this
Every
trigger?
argument needs
You
a
read a
trigger
trigger
warning.
warning in every single argument you read that.
At
That's
the point,
gross.
at the
Literally
point.
ridiculous. You can give your speech because you don't have a crowd.
Off-time roadmap. It's going to be. Whoa, I am okay. Sorry, I'm a little bit thrown out of it. Sorry, can I take a moment?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can take time if you need it. That's fine.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. Okay. So it's gonna be just basically all about the show, everything, and I'll do it slow because I think at this point, like everybody knows what's being said. So I mean, it won't be like it won't be super slow, but it won't be spready. Okay. They say that we don't respond to drop the argument. We literally do. We extend both drop the debater warrants, which one of them they don't respond to. There's a lot of people watching this round. They're obviously going to know that it sets a better norm to drop the debater than drop the argument, because if you drop the argument, then they win, which sets the norm that you can get away with stuff like that. They didn't respond to that warrant. On race to the bottom, they also didn't respond to our front lines. It's a really bad argument at the point where A, we already established that we came into the round wanting to talk about women's rights and chose not to do it because somebody said they were uncomfortable, and B, that it's like not the same thing when they clearly linked into our content warning shell. I would understand the responses if we hadn't already given a content warning shell to non-graphic communications about women's rights. And then they come in talking about the feminist worldview and the patriarchy, which is a non-graphic description of women's rights, even if it's econ. They know somebody in this room has an issue with non-graphic descriptions of women's rights, and they still responded to it, and they still kept going. This takes out their counterinterp about like non-graphic and everything about that, because they don't have the authority to decide what isn't and isn't triggering. We're not trying to negate their identity. We came in wanting to talk about it. We just care about the safety of people around more. Let's go to our counter-interp. A is the interpretation. You have to give a triggering topic for a trigger warning for triggering topics such as women's rights, especially when somebody has opted out. B is the violation. They didn't do this despite knowing that somebody in the room had opted out. They literally chose winning the round off of like the safety of an individual in round. The two standards is safety, which they've talked about, but like haven't really answered, that we have to prioritize the safety of an individual. The safety is better, and we have to prioritize for that as members of this community. The second, which they have never responded to, is fairness, that I literally couldn't continue on in the round because all of my responses to women's rights I didn't want to bring up because I didn't want to cause harm to somebody else. Drop the debater to punish them for the violation they've done multiple times, better than norms, no RBIs because they can bait and because it's logic. They shouldn't get rewarded for having this. Not every single argument you need a way to win. I'm sorry that you can't win this argument, but it's your fault that you're here in the first place. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna run fast. All right, so the order will be just erase the bottom stuff on there, Sierra. Okay, then I'm gonna start on our counter interp, and then I'll go to the drop the debater versus argument stuff, and then all right. Okay, get a thumbs up. Am I rolling there? All right, cool. Extend our interp. A is the interpretation. Debater should read a content warning if it's going to be physically or mentally triggering. Violation. We did not like read a trigger warning, so we meet this. The standard is safety, and we agree on all that. Okay. The critical mistake they make in this round is when they drop the education as a prereq to fairness. We tell you that education fundamentally shapes the way that we understand fairness. Things like Brown v. Board of Education shape our ability to interpret what isn't fair. Insofar as that's true, you should vote for the team that best preserves education is clean dropped in the round. At that point, you go to our argument on the racely bottom. Their interpretation is terrible. It allows every single debater to kick out of any sort of educational argument by saying that it's going to create a content warning. They read things about poverty. They read things about interclass war. That could be triggering for so many people, but the reason they don't read a content warning is because it's not graphic. In debate, we still talk about issues. All issues are triggering because they're issues. They suck. It's so bad that we have poverty. That doesn't mean we don't read a trigger warning. They see that they want to talk about into this round, so it doesn't create a race to bottom. That's not the argument. We see that as a fundamental norm. It is a bad model for debate if you have to read a trigger warning for anything that ever talks about any sort of grouping harm, because that's literally every argument in the round. They say that our violation is that someone in the round said that they had an issue with the women's rights arguments. Our argument isn't even about women's rights. We literally just talk about how IMF programs create impoverished conditions for women. It's not about subjugation or any kind of dominion or control. You can look at the case script. It's literally just that women face poverty and malnutrition men. Their entire case talks about these same things, but it doesn't talk about in the context of women. If anything, that means what's triggering for them is the idea of feminism, which links into our case about how people are okay talking about overall economic issues, but not when it comes to women. That's way worse for debate. Also, they really mishandled. They dropped the debater, dropped the warrant impact. All they say is that we dropped their warrant. They extend the sets norms. No, Sanjita tells you that we're still setting the norm because it's live stream. Like they say, we're having the discourse on what is a good and isn't a good kind of content warning. At that point, you extend our warrant that's completely dropped. This is for growth. If you allow debaters to go for an argument, not drop them, you just don't drop the argument that allows them to grow in the context of this round that goes clean drop. That means that you go to the only substance left on the flow, which is the turn on their crypto argument. When you say that you can solve econ issues by solving their issue, it links into our case. They say that it's unfair because they couldn't read their case in this round. No, they could interact with the fairness, and they could also just write econ responses. It's literally not unfair. It's not my fault if the IMF is terrible for women's economic prospects.
Okay, thanks everyone. Yeah, it's difficult to kind of rupture that rigorous silence. And now I'm in a position where I say, like, we have a decision, but that seems like the grossest thing to kind of like deliver after this kind of discussion. But I don't know. I guess that's part of the activity. But I commend, you know, both teams for, you know, being willing to be participants and, you know, remaining courteous and receptive to learning, and just you know, these are difficult conversations to have, and I think there was a lot of I don't know, rigor in your willingness to I guess investigate and explain and empathize, and thank you. So the decision in the round is a 3-0 for the con from Doherty Valley. I don't know if we want more of a conversation or if anyone feels like taking the lead there.
Sanjita and I are happy to stay for a conversation about norms in the activity, but we don't have to have it if the judges or our opponents don't want to, but Sanjita and I are happy to stay for that.
I think that anything I say, I'm gonna start crying, which I so if Neil wants to stay, he can, but I just feel like I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we're still being live streamed. I think we are, but like, why does this like activity not give a shit about people's safety? Like, it's not even about the decision. Like, I don't care about the decision. Like, we didn't expect to get to octas at TOC anyway. We were in at large, and we came into this round against the top seed, and we thought we were gonna lose anyway. So I don't care about the decision at all. It's just like a continuous decision from this community to just like I just don't understand at the point where a safety concern has been made, how adults and individuals continuously place things like flow and I don't know, like just like logical responses against people's like actual safety and the emotional stress and the emotional value of people around. And it just makes me so aware of so many like systemic, like deep issues that are in this activity, at the point where like we just continue to affirm norms or allow people. And I'm not necessarily saying this to like to the other teams, to the opponents or anything, right? Because like it's not my goal to make anybody feel bad about themselves, right? Like I don't want to hurt anybody, but it's just like this whole community, it just makes so many choices that overlook the safety of individuals in this community. Like all the freaking camps out here that like cause, I mean, and not every single camp, but so many camps where they have people in positions of power that are like making it an unsafe environment for children and staffers and things like, it's just like we continuously ignore or warrant out or choose to not value the safety of people in this activity. And it's just like this repeated decision. I keep seeing it again and again. Like, I don't know, people raise safety concerns and people they just outweigh it, right? Which like nothing should outweigh safety in a community that's dealing with people as young as 13 and building like long lasting mental like traumas and mental like thought patterns in teenagers. Like I don't know, like not only to the judges or like to the coaches or like to the competitors and stuff like that, but I just feel like we get caught up in the fact that we're at like TOC, like international championships and stuff like that, and we forget we're dealing with like legitimate teenagers, and people just like continuously outweigh or turn around or get out of the flow of people's safety. like I don't know, like that's, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, now I've made I'm crying to hundreds of people on a live stream, right? Which is like not something I planned to do today. But it's just like, I can't even, there's something so wrong. There's just something so wrong with this community, and I don't know how we're gonna fix it or when it's gonna change, but I just know it's like, it's there and it's, yeah. So I don't know how much more I can contribute to this. I don't think I'm okay for like a conversation right now, because I'm obviously a little bit like not, composed, and I don't want to spend more time. So yeah.
Take care. If we were in the same room, I would give you a hug, because obviously me and Sanjita are two women of color, and I've only debated in female-female partnerships. And I think that these ideas that this activity can sometimes be unsafe is a big reason why I quit debate my junior year. And me and Sanjita have experienced a lot of both racism and sexism in this activity. So we can empathize with you on that level. If you don't want to but at the same time, we also had some issues with this round and some of the stuff that was said. If you don't want to engage in that, that's fine. You can take off now, but we definitely feel for you. And
We
the idea
feel
that
for you.
this
It
debate
wasn't-
activity can be
We
discouraging
also
sometimes.
think trigger warnings are very important. We think the safety of everyone in this round is very important. We have read trigger warnings. I think it's a super important issue, and I appreciate you bringing it up. But I don't want to come across by any means that I'm someone who does not prioritize the safety of debaters, because that is something that is extremely important to both me and Sanji. And I think that there are a lot of issues with this community as well, and I think that we're not doing enough to solve them. That being said, I did think there was problems with this round specifically, and things that were said about our character and our identities in this round that I take issue with, but I don't want to go on about that.
I think what really irked us was the idea that you all thought we were reading this case without a trigger warning to win the round.
Which
for
we would never
context,
do.
For context, the SAPs that IMF instituted on India is a big reason why females in my family have never had access to proper education. My mother learned in villages where there wasn't a ground on the school, and the teacher would come 2 days a week, because education and healthcare was so underfunded. My grandmother never had access to food because of the malnutrition issues. And so she still, and all of my mom's side, women have chronic malnutrition issues because of the systemic issues that IMF has had. So for me and Sanjita, reading these colonialism and feminism arguments is a way to reconcile what the West has done to our families. So the idea that we were just reading.
I want to clarify that. Oh, sorry, I didn't interrupt. But I want to clarify that I have nothing against identity arguments or you running the identity argument. The problem is that in a debate round, there's only two sides talking, right? And it's one side and another side. And obviously, your role as a debater and your side and your role in this round was to defend yourself, right? And I'm not blaming you for defending yourself or negating the identity argument or anything like that. But the position that Neil and I were put in is we had a distinct understanding that from our interpretation that somebody else's who we don't know, their safety was being compromised in the round. So it becomes an issue of there feels like there's an obligation on my end and on Neil's end to continue the argument, not for ourselves, but for other people who are witnessing the round.
But I'm sure you can imagine how frustrating it can be for me and Sanjita when we're not reading anything that is just objectively, it's just not triggering. We're just saying that poverty impacts women. So you can understand how frustrating it must be on our end when there aren't a lot of topics where we get to talk about what the West has done to our ancestors. And so when one comes up and we're in the double octafinal round of the TOC that, you said, or the octarounds that is being live streamed, one of the top rounds in the country, where we were looking to have a debate where we raise awareness about these issues, we're shut out of doing that for what I still think is not a valid violation of safety. Whoa. So I'm sorry, our coach is calling us and I have to help my sister get breakfast, but so we have to take off. But thank you for bringing this up, and we can set up a time later to talk about this further. Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
I mean,
Thank you
just and everyone else to clarify, we agree that like issues of women's rights globally are extremely important, and that's the exact reason why we came to this round in the first place, wanting to like have discourse on the issues, right? But what we also realize is that some people aren't comfortable debating those topics, and for whatever reasons, the structure of this activity might force them to, right? So we would say that like because the content warning, like we agree, we think that talking about the issues is important. We just think it needs to be done responsibly. So like I hope that like everyone that's watching the round right now, I hope that you guys can advocate for issues that that you care about, and also, but I hope you do it like responsibly and with respect to everyone.
I think it might be productive and beneficial for the sake of the conversation, and especially the live stream and the observers, to perhaps widen the perspective of the conversation and hear maybe some of what the judges have to say.
Yeah.
If anyone has anything to contribute,
You guys mind
no
giving
pressure.
just so we know like what the opinions of the judges were.
Yeah, I mean, who wants to go first? I don't really care.
Can I'm happy to have RFDs be given if that's what everybody else wants to go in, and to go into this conversation. But I know that like Diverty Valley has articulated that like they have to go and help their family and that they have to contact people. And I know that I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there's like, to have productive conversations, I think that I think that the conversation is really important and that we should have the conversation. But I also think that in order to have that conversation, a certain level of healing probably needs to be done on like both sides before before you're ready to go into a conversation where it's like collaborative understanding and not the debate mindset of like one side wins and one side doesn't. And I think that also like giving RFDs with one side wins and one side doesn't is not necessarily helpful for like a conversation. So as much as like, I mean, I'm okay with this conversation going in, and I've already cried. So like, what do I have to lose, So like, I'm fine to like stay here and have that. But I also think that like, I understand that I think on all sides, on both sides, like that there's obviously value to a conversation, but there's also value to healing and taking away from an experience and then coming back at a later date with like everything like that. And I think that in this instance, that might be the more productive option, unless,
No, I think that's a good
Yeah.
idea. I don't know if like one of the judges or someone can talk to the tournament about hosting a larger discussion about norms in the activity at a later point in this tournament or later this week or something. But I think that's a good idea.
okay, so Neil and I are gonna head out. But yeah, bye everybody, bye Doherty, and yeah.